Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode in our virtual event series covering the electrification of commercial fleets. I'm Andrew Elkin, Managing Editor of Electric Autonomy's EV Fleets Knowledge Hub, and I'm here to introduce this episode, Maintenance for Fleet EVs and Charging Infrastructure. Today's panel discussion is brought to you by two of our EV Fleets presenting sponsors, ABB eMobility and Sailun Tire Canada. We're grateful to our friends at ABB eMobility and Sailun Tire Canada for their participation and support of this discussion. We've got a couple of quick things to touch on before we get started today. Just take a moment to acknowledge that our work at Electric Autonomy is conducted from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Before we jump into the discussion, I'll just quickly mention Electric Autonomy's work on the EV Fleets program. If you're not familiar, EV Fleets is an online course for fleet pros who want to take the first steps toward electrifying their fleets. So if you have not already, I encourage you to check it out after our session today at evfleets.pro. Signing up is completely free. Et j'ai une petite note pour les membres francophones de notre public. Nous sommes en mesure de proposer une traduction en direct de la session d'aujourd'hui. Pour activer cette fonction, cliquez sur le bouton Afficher les sous-titres ou sous-titres dans votre barre de contrôle Zoom, puis cliquez la flèche pour sélectionner la langue de votre choix. I'm very happy to introduce you to our panelists now, starting with Florencia Boccio, Sales Manager, Transit and Fleet at ABB eMobility. Welcome, Florencia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dwayne Sawyer, Manager, National Sales, Passenger and Light Truck at Sailun Tire Canada. Hi, Dwayne.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Jérémie Bernardin, Director of Electric Vehicle Training and Innovation at Integrated Automotive Experience. Hi, Jérémie.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be here today.
And my colleague, Ilana Weitzman, Vice President of Strategic Development, Clean Transportation at Electric Autonomy. Ilana will be moderating today's discussion. Welcome to you all. Now, we'd also love to hear your questions, so please use the Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen, and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can. You can upvote questions that other people have asked. And if you're not asking a question, you can add a comment in the chat box and engage with the other attendees. And now, over to Ilana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Andrew mentioned, we have a great panel, and I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists for a quick intro, and we'll start with you, Jérémie.
I just inhaled some water, so forgive me here if I'm coughing a little bit. So I've been in the electric vehicle space for over 10 years, and essentially my whole career is around connecting with the consumers and helping with training and developing interesting programs. I've worked with governments or on electric vehicle awareness campaigns. Sorry, that water. And but most recently, I had founded an electric vehicle dealership called All EV Canada, and we had 4 locations across the Maritimes with service centers. So I can speak a little bit to servicing EVs and how that fits in. And in my current role, I develop training programs for industry on how to increase EV sales or how to bring EVs into their fleets.
Fantastic. Florencia.
So thank you once more, Ilana and Electric Autonomy for having me. Sorry. So yeah, I'm Florencia Boccio. I am sales manager for the Western Canada here at ABB eMobility. I've joined this year, and I think it's an exciting moment to be part of this industry. So excited and really happy, and yeah, lots of things to do. So thank you for having me.
And Dwayne.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Dwayne Sawyer, a little bit over 35 years in the tire industry. had my own stores, worked for a number of manufacturers and some distributors. Mainly in my past, I've been working with light duty fleets, heavy duty fleets, mining groups for tracking their tires and making sure that everybody's safe. And so 35 years and learning things every day. So Jérémie's going to teach me a few things about electric vehicles today.
Wonderful. And I think that's actually a really lovely point, is that we're talking about maintenance, and obviously that includes reskilling teams and costs. And I know there's lots of questions around that. But I love the idea that we've put safety first, that this discussion around maintenance is really about keeping everyone safe. And it really is a critical part of running and operating an electrified fleet. So Jérémie, we're going to start with you to, I'd say, give us the bird's eye view of what the difference is for maintenance between an electric vehicle fleet and a combustion vehicle fleet, in terms of both regular maintenance and scheduled replacements. What should fleets expect?
Great starting question. I mean, first of all, there's a lot less to do, which is the great advantage. I mean, for a lot of businesses, it's all about uptime, right? Every time your vehicle's in for service is a time that you're not able to be completing work and bringing in revenue. So it's super important to have high uptime, both for your equipment and your vehicle, but also being able to reduce the maintenance schedule is a huge advantage. Now, there's still some maintenance on these vehicles, right? Just because they have a lot less moving parts in their drivetrain doesn't mean they still don't, require all sorts of servicing. Your steering components, your suspension components. You have a lot of the normal things on a vehicle, and there's still some scheduled, service components that are specific to the EV drivetrain, but they're at like really, really long intervals. And I did a bit of research to try to find some specific examples, and I reached out to some friends at Ford Canada, and on the Ford Lightning, your thermal management coolant flush, so that's the system that keeps the battery and the motor cool, is changed at 312,000 kilometers, not before that. And if you want to change, one of the scheduled services for your drivetrain gearbox, so your electric motor rotates faster than the wheels. So there's a gear set that helps it, to have the appropriate speed, and you change that oil at 240,000 kilometers. So, that's just two quick examples that there's still some maintenance, and Dwayne will dive into tires, but a lot around tires and brakes, and a lot of it goes around to servicing and making sure that safety is priority, right? Making sure components are in good shape. So the vehicles still need to be looked at every year to make sure that everything's safe and operating well, but there's just a lot less required maintenance on it.
Well, that sounds like a good segue over to you, Dwayne. So the sort of where the rubber meets the road is the tires, obviously a critical component. And that might be one case where EVs have a bigger impact on tires, or tend to have a bigger impact on tires than their combustion cousins.
Well, when we talk about electrical, we always start at the ground, right? And that's where the tires are. So we know that the vehicles weigh about 10% more, and that, so that makes the tires wear that much faster. So, the industry standard is about 20% faster in wear. And so when we talk about wear, there's a lot of factors that contribute to wear. And, there's the maintenance side of things, which, we'll get into quickly, but, it's the wear factors that I think that fleet managers will really want to be aware of. But before we get into that, I just want to say, on the reading a sidewall, I'm sure every fleet manager knows how to read a sidewall, but if you don't, they're inside the placard, on a placard inside the door. There's some numbers there that tell you the size width, the percentage of the width is the height of the sidewall. Then the last number will be the rim diameter. But it's also followed by 3 numbers and a letter, or 2 numbers and a letter. It could be 98H or 126 H, and those are the numbers that are very important for fleet managers to be aware of. So a typical tire, if it's 100H, for example, like on a Equinox, if you put an EV tire on, you're going to need 107H. So the speed rating, the last letter, is not as important as the first part. It's the 100 or the 107 that the fleet managers are really going to have to be aware of. You'd never want to put a tire on that doesn't meet the load range, and that's those three numbers. And so, for safety's sake, just make sure. I've just had a fleet last week, and a tire off of one vehicle, they're going to put on another, which happened to be electric, and it does weigh more. And so, if something does happen and you have the wrong size or the wrong rating, you're going to end up with a uninsurable case because you basically overloaded the tire.
Yeah, that sounds that sounds like the most mission critical piece. And then in terms of, you mentioned the weight of the vehicle. Are there other factors with tires that fleets should really be thinking of when they are looking at, bringing electric vehicles into that space?
Yeah, so the nice thing is there's not the oil changes and all the things that Jérémie was so nicely talking about, 300,000 kilometers, 200,000 kilometers, but there is faster wear. And so the tires are much more sensitive. So, as a manufacturer, and all manufacturers, we design tires with the right compounds to reduce the noise and to give you more range, better traction in wet. And, there's different ways of doing that. Usually it's a trade-off. If you want more traction, you're going to give up on comfort, or if you want more dry traction, you're going to give up on wet traction. But the compounding today is so much far advanced that we can achieve those things. And then there's sound deadening things inside. But as far as fleets, when you look at the tire will tell a story of how the components of the suspension are working. So if it's got cupping or feathering, the outside edge of the tire, if both outside edges of the tire are worn, you probably have an underinflated or an overloaded situation. If you have a center wear, it means the tire is probably overloaded or overinflated, I should say. And so you're not going to get the best footprint. If the edges are worn off, you'll have some issues with alignment. So my recommendation would be, have a tread depth gauge, an air gauge. There's three TPMS sensors in the vehicles, most vehicles now. So just make sure you're looking to see what those air pressures are at, and also just to make sure you schedule in more alignments. You hit a pothole, which there's none in Ontario, but if you hit a pothole, you have a good chance of knocking out the alignment. There's the sidewall scrubbing, and because the vehicles are that much more sensitive, you're going to want to have them inspected that much more often. Changing the tires, rotating the tires, very key for maintenance. We've talked about that in heavy duty, class 7s and 8s, but for light duty fleets, it's equally as important if the vehicle allows it, if it doesn't have a staggered fitment.
I'm going to use your pothole segue to speak to Florencia, who is in my hometown of Montreal today. So very well accustomed to potholes. Florencia, we've talked about the vehicles. Let's talk about the chargers, because I think they're sometimes, unfortunately, a bit of an afterthought when it comes to maintenance and ongoing servicing. It would be great to hear a little bit about what goes on inside that box, and how people can, what they should be aware of when it comes to maintenance and ongoing servicing, and how what's going on in there.
For sure. So thank you for that smooth transition. Since I am in Montreal still, I would say that, from the EV charging perspective, ABB has been enabling for years, almost 100 million sessions. It's a big number like that. So there's a lot of data and a lot of average, you would say, time that we have scheduled for maintenance. So preventive maintenance for us, it's key. When you buy an ABB charger, any charger, I guess, there is a 2-year time frame that you have a warranty. Then we do have extended warranty. But I think in order to respond to your question, like simple things that you need to take care of, for sure, is, all of our equipment is IP54 approved, which means it is able to be under any dust or like salty circumstance. So it is able to resist. But we have a filter, out filter and inner filter that needs to be watched and changed. And that, we recommend 1 year of period minimum of change when it comes to the the inner and outer filter, but that can change regarding condition. And we do a different recommendation depending on where this charger is situated. So it is very important that you take care of that. There is I would say, an ocular inspection of everything that is interfacing with the human, with the user here. So cables, I know we hear a lot about cables. Cables need to be taken care with, with smooth treaty, I would say, right? Not with everything wrong that went on that day, you take it on the cable. I guess that's something that we as users, as well as manufacturers, need to speak about. This is the sensitive, if not the most sensitive part of the charger, and it's outside the charger. So that is one thing for sure. And I guess HMI as well, which is also the interface with the customer, that is something that needs to be taken care of and watched. And I think if the cable is not working, you will definitely have some failed sessions. So I'll say corrective maintenance comes after that. But when it comes to preventive, like ocular revision of these parts is key, as well as, of course, the filter. If we're talking about a dusty, very dusty environment, more than once a year, we recommend even quarterly revision. And if the revision throws out, it needs to be changed, then changed. But our service level agreement, even if it's just preventive maintenance, takes care of all that. And we make sure that for sure it's taken care of, so that you can have that uptime that Jérémie was actually pointing out how important it is. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. So we've been talking a little bit about sort of what to expect. And then if we think about the team that's supporting that, Jérémie, coming back to you, we've had a few questions about upskilling teams to handle this new technology. So obviously, the biggest change is we've got a high voltage battery at play. And so I think there's probably some fear factor around just taking that car like any other car and starting to service it. What do teams need to know?
That's a really good point, where there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of resistance and a lot of hesitance and the unknown. And I mentioned a lot of the servicing components earlier. You're going to change windshield wiper blades, you're going to service brake calipers, you might change a suspension, or a steering linkage or something. None of that involves the high voltage stuff, but you have to be comfortable around the vehicle, and as simple as jacking the vehicle properly, like putting the vehicle on a lift. Now, something people don't know is if you put the wrong jack point and you happen to dent the battery case on a Tesla in particular, 3 millimeters is all it takes to write off the vehicle. So if your battery casing gets dented in, gets punched in by 3 millimeters, your battery pack's gone. You have to get a whole new pack. And often that's an insurance claim for the entire vehicle in some instances. Now, so it's important for all the staff that are doing maintenance on the vehicle to be comfortable, to understand safety precautions, to have proper safety PPE, right? What if they do go and do a bit more diagnostics and start working on the vehicle? There's things like service disconnects, which just depowers the battery. So if you're working on the car, you know that you don't have the high voltage wires that are all connected in. So there are some steps involved in making sure that they're operating in a safe environment, but that they truly have confidence that they're not going to harm themselves. And at the end of the day, these vehicles are extremely safe. And there's a lot of funny stories. You can dump a bucket of water on the charger while it's charging. There's an insulation system where if there's any problems, it'll just stop the session like in a microsecond, like a 1/10,000th of a second. There is no harm available, but people that don't know would be sometimes afraid to even connect the vehicle to a charger if there's light rain or if there's rain, or things like that. Or can they wash the vehicle while the vehicle's plugged in? You absolutely can. There's no danger involved, but it's important for them to feel that safety, right? And to feel comfortable, and for them to, if they have a multitude of vehicles they can choose from in the fleet, that they can choose the electric one. That's what the fleet operator wants. It's your lowest operating cost, and you want to get an ROI on that product. You don't want it to be ignored. So the importance of onboarding, and it goes back to Florencia's point on the charger connector, right? We get a lot of damages on it. People roll over the wires, roll over the connector. I mean, that's one of the challenges. So my point is the importance of onboarding, the importance of providing training and knowing what to do, what are the do's or don't do's in regards to charging, in regards to servicing the vehicle. Now, unfortunately, or at this point, unfortunately, there isn't a ton of places that people can go to get this service. There's a few private entities that provide it. There's some colleges that do provide it, but they really cater it towards a service technician that will go and get a full EV certification. I'm looking at the BCIT in British Columbia, Nova Scotia Community College, St. Clair College in Ontario. I think George Brown as well offers full EV programs. Now, some of those are quite in depth, right? And you're looking at 32 weeks or whatnot. You're looking at a really big course where some people that work with fleets, they just want to learn how to work safely on vehicles, and they don't need to learn how to take a whole battery apart and learn how to fix an inverter. They just want to be able to do regular maintenance in a safe way. So I'd say right now there's perhaps a little bit of a gap in the market. There's certain entities, and I'm personally working on some of those solutions, but I'm certainly not the only one across the country, though. But I would
You're not.
Absolutely, right, of course. And but Florencia, if you have any more comments or
Well,
other organizations you can point to.
I was gonna let you, of course, I was not gonna interrupt you, but I think you made a really good point when coming to the education that is needed for this new technology that is skyrocketing. And if we think about how much time we've got oil and gas engines and all the structure, it's like 100 years, and this is really recent. It's less than 10, so we have a really good challenge and step up really fast for companies and people. So I would say from ABB, we're looking at this problem or a challenge. And I think, yes, we have a product, a module that comes from the training of the handling the charger point. I think the charger also needs maintenance, and it's not the same as any other hardware. So I think we're trying to develop something that will be launched next year that will come from the training side of things. And it is something that every part of the stakeholder chain of you would say EV structure needs to definitely address. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and Dwayne, from the Sailun tire standpoint, how do you sort of work with your customers? What sort of onboarding or training is your approach?
Well, it goes back to the education, like Jérémie touched on. I was actually just going to send Jérémie a question so that when the person brings in their vehicle to a tire store, or Canadian Tires, the local garages, should they walk up with the owner's manual and just say, just so for reference, this is how you jack up my vehicle? And for us, it's more about making sure that they don't wear the tires too quickly. There's some pretty aggressive drivers. I think as a fleet maintenance manager, you want to make sure that you're watching the wear of the tires. When you have, for mining tires, you can lock out gears. For heavy duty trucks, they're regulated at 105 kilometers. But when it comes to EV vehicles, I have the benefit of listening to 6 or 7 folks in the office about how fast they merge onto traffic because they have so much torque. What they don't realize is that that quick response to getting into the lane is affecting the wear of their tires. But they're in the industry too, so. But it's about training.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. We've got, the training of the fleet maintenance staff, but you're absolutely right. There's driver onboarding training, and that is just as critical a component in terms of driving habits and watching your telematics and coaching, I would say, maybe not correcting, but coaching your drivers about, how to accelerate properly and not bust the tires. And Florencia, same thing in terms of good charging habits and good charging etiquette with those cables and connectors as well. So I love that you brought visibility to the importance of bringing your drivers into the conversation as well.
Ilana, can I just add to Dwayne's point there, where we're talking about higher tire wear and driver behavior? It's important to realize there's a lot more torque and there's a lot more forces in both directions, right? So deceleration with regenerative braking, you recapture a lot of that energy. It's really important to have good regenerative braking And there's some studies on that showcase it biases the rear wheel drive if it's an all-wheel drive vehicle. So you'll have some tires that experience more wear. And that's where for a fleet, telematics can be so important, right? So if you have a driver that's just really enjoying the benefits of electric and is enjoying getting up to speed in a spirited manner, then there could be some coaching. I've seen a lot of different programs where you can get different points and you make contests and who can get the most efficiency out of the vehicle. And these telematics are also really important in detecting which fleets are not operating properly if they're using plug-in hybrids. And there's an example locally for a parts distribution runaround vehicle. It's a plug-in hybrid, but the manager refuses to plug any of the plugins because he has a fear of the building catching fire, which is an unfound fear, right? The charger will not, catch fire. The vehicle won't catch fire. If you look at pure statistics on the amount of vehicles on the road that are electric versus gas and which ones have caught fire per 100,000 sold, EVs are actually lower than gasoline vehicles. But if there is one, it certainly catches the news and makes a big splash. So there's a lot of unfound fears around that. But my point was the importance of telematics and detecting who's driving really fast, who's going to wear those tires out, and who's actually not taking advantage on plug-in hybrids specifically of where you can get some significant savings for your fleet. That's the whole point of getting a plug-in hybrid, right? It's to have lower operating costs, but if people aren't using it, it's not doing anything. And the only way you can truly tell is through telematics.
I think that's a really good point. So Florencia, in terms of the charger, as you said, it's a completely new piece of the puzzle, meaning this is something that fleets will not have operated, maintained, serviced, unlike the vehicles where there's a good starting point. Where in the organization does that responsibility typically fall? And then what are the options for fleets if they just want to outsource that responsibility?
Wow, that's a great question. And I think I think I will use this as a response, which is pretty common, but it is a joint effort within a company, and there's also different stakeholders within this market. So you can have charging network operators or site owners, and the responsibility at the end falls on all of them, on each of them. I think there is a gray area right now, and I think as hardware manufacturers, and we have a mandate to transmit this message of the cost and everything that you need to look at from a charger point of view is not just the hardware, but you need to put into the cost of owning the hardware, the preventive maintenance of its lifespan. That is very important for you to actually take the juice out of the hardware and have a reliable hardware. So I would say maintenance is key always, the maintenance teams. And from ABB, we have a mandate of educating, of doing training to our end users. So they get trained on how to maintain this hardware, which is very important. We also think, I guess, from the cost point of view, and I think I got a good question from that regard that said something about how can I estimate the cost of maintaining my hardware? And I think it's a great question. It's a great question that needs a specific answer for not the maintenance teams, but the supply chains or the purchasing teams that need to make this number. So I think if you talk about preventive maintenance for hardware for the first 5 years, you can estimate 5% or less for 5% of the initial cost, right? For the cost of the hardware to be allocated to preventive maintenance. And that is a really good estimate. If you go a little bit further and instead of preventive maintenance, you want to think about service level, like high service level agreement that will take care of everything, that number will go probably higher, maybe 7, 6, 7. And it also, I'm talking about our all-in-one solution here, which is we have fleet audience. If we talk about probably transit and pantographs, that number can change slightly, but still, I think it is a joint responsibility between, I would say, the person that is deciding the purchase and the decision from, let's say, purchasing power and cost manner, and then, of course, maintenance, which is key. And having a trained team within the company, that's ideal. But if not, we can help in that regard. We can do preventive maintenance, and that's part of the solution that we have a mandate on, I guess, getting better and better, because we have deployed so many hardware across Canada and across the world. And we are with the intent of, I guess, getting a better service level to all of those chargers in the future more and more, because it is super important, as you know, to have an uptime. So, yeah.
I'm actually going to use that occasion to segue into some of the great audience questions that we've been getting. Jérémie, there's a question about cost, similar to what Florencia was talking about. People are wondering, there's a lot of apocryphal information out there on the sort of reduction in maintenance costs that folks will experience with electric vehicles. Do you have a sense of what the difference is in maintenance costs between electric vehicles and combustion vehicles from your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that's usually brought in at the purchasing point where they're calculating ROI and when does it make sense to bring in EVs. I always point people to the Consumer Reports study. So they're saying over the lifetime of the vehicle, they expect a 50% reduction in maintenance spend over the lifetime of the vehicle, right? So 50%. If I look at Ford Canada stats, Ford Canada for the Lightning, if people wonder why I'm saying Ford so much, I was the lead technical trainer for the Ford Lightning launch, so I just know these numbers a little bit more. So Ford Lightning, they're expecting 40% lifetime reduction in maintenance costs for that particular model. But again, Consumer Reports is estimating 50%. We often hear, and it's a bit of a myth on, but you have to replace the battery every 2 years, right? Or every 4 years or whatnot. And I just want to point out that in Canada, there's laws. It's a minimum of 8-year, 160,000 kilometer warranty for every single electric vehicle on the road that has a battery, right? So you're not replacing that battery before that. And there's many EVs that have warranties that are beyond that. Now, it's important to also state that you know, the newer battery technology in particular is extremely reliable. And there's really exciting research that's come out of some Canadian universities, particularly Dalhousie, where they're seeing usage patterns for these batteries that will far, far, far exceed the lifetime of the vehicle. So in my calculations, I'd say, you know, the battery issue is not a large one at all. There may be some units, just like vehicles, that sometimes do need an engine or a transmission replaced, but batteries have proven themselves to be, you know, really reliable.
On that note, are there battery, similar to being nice to your charging cables, are there good habits for batteries?
Yeah, I saw that question from Steve. Steve, thanks for sending that. So, you know, battery care to ensure longevity and to make sure that your vehicle can last a long time. That comes right back down to my other point on onboarding, right? When you're doing training, you know, your organization might say, okay, we're going to get, you know, a fleet of 100 medium duty, you know, delivery vehicles that are electric, or we'll get 50 EVs that are going to do, you know, work for our organization. But unless you have really good onboarding and you have really good training on even answering basic questions and making sure the staff are comfortable, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So to answer that question, you know, what can you do to ensure battery longevity with fleets? It really comes down to it comes down a little bit to the vehicles and developing a protocol. And some vehicles have different battery chemistries that you can charge to 100% and there's no problem whatsoever. And then I'd say the majority of electric vehicles on the road, they do better if you charge to 80%. So if you know, on the consumer side of things, I tell people charge to 100% when you're going on a road trip. It really doesn't matter. That's why it's built for. But on a day-to-day level, charge to 80%. With a fleet, it's a little bit more complicated because it depends on the duty cycle, right? It depends if the vehicle has if you have a time for a 15-minute break to do a fast charging session at your lunch, you know, depends on your if you have that ABB fast charger in your fleet, or if you have just a level 2 charger. But at the end of the day, a lot of that onboarding, right? So setting your charge levels to 80%, making sure the vehicle, if you can plug it in before it gets to 20%, those are like the best behaviors. Will the vehicle survive if you don't? Like, of course it will. But if you're looking at a really long-term horizon, you want to maximize your fleet. You want to make sure you're getting the most out of that battery for 10, 15 years. Then there's a whole set of different little things that you can do, like preconditioning your battery. So those are really simple things, and it really adds to the comfort level of the employee, right? If you have a thing where the vehicles are all set to leave at 7:15 in the morning once they've been loaded, you just plug it into the system saying, I want the cabin warmed, I want the heated seats on, I want the battery to be preconditioned by 7:15, and the vehicle will do all of that. And the important part here, and this kind of ties into Dwayne a little bit on tires and efficiency. It's all about maximizing the efficiency of the vehicle, and that's where preconditioning it, you're using electricity from the charger or from the grid to do all of that work, not from the battery. And that's where you're going to get the most out of your range. And why it ties into Dwayne is, electric vehicle tires, focus heavily on efficiency, right? It's super important to be able to go and get the most we can out of our charge. And there's a lot of innovations on the tire side of things for comfort, as Dwayne had mentioned, for acoustics, but also for how far you can go on these tires. So making sure that they're properly inflated is also important to make sure you have good range out of your vehicle.
I'm going to jump in on that one. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Can I jump in just for 2 seconds? I read a message from Brent about retreading. If I would still recommend retreading. And absolutely, yes. Retreading is a very good portion of, and this is not for passenger light truck vehicles. We're talking about medium duty. So, your F450s, 550s, and up to your, class 7s and 8s. I do recommend, retreading. The retreading has evolved as well. So the industry itself is evolving in tread compounds. And casing, when we develop new casing, we're developing a casing for SmartWay approval, CARB in California, just to make sure that the rolling resistance is the lowest. So when we do even mining tires and truck tires, as well as passenger light truck tires, we're implementing this new type of technology for how to make compounds. So the compounds are that much, a lot more concentrated. So the compounding that you used to have in the past, if you went to a tire factory, there would be a Banbury, a thing that mixes, like a great big pot, and you'd put in a bunch of chemicals, and they'd be in bags or liquid form. The new technology that's out there and available is that they make all those chemicals that are going to be mixed. They liquefy them all. They mix them so that the consistency throughout the whole. Like if you cut a section of it, you'll see that the consistency of the compound is equal. And so I know that, so some of the rechargers, I won't name who, but I know that they're working on compounds as well, because rolling resistance, especially when you have, that excessive weight, when you get into class 7s and 8s, it becomes that much more sensitive as well. So, Steve, hope that answers your question. Yes, I'm a proponent for continuing with retread plants. I did build a retread plant in my past, and so I'm an advocate for that.
Thanks, Dwayne. I was actually I was going to send that question over to you, so thank you for that. Florencia, we have a question here about charger uptime and what expectations should be for fleets. Fleets are a different context than public charging. We're not going to get into public charger reliability here and the complexity of that. I think the advantage for fleets when they're installing their own infrastructure is it's their infrastructure. And that's why we actually recommend depot or home charging setups for fleets as part of this program rather than reliance on public charging. But I do have a question here around, obviously uptime is critical. Should you plan for backup chargers? How do you ensure uptime at that depot? And what should expectations be in terms of percent uptime and how to handle that?
I think it is a great question, and it's on the realistic side of things. So things break. Things usually break in any capacity in life, and this is no exception. So I think it's great that we touch base on this. And yes, I think when designing a charging network, I believe it is best to obviously analyze all the aspects requiring, what range of availability you need, what time do you need to charge, and what time frames do you have, and obviously having a backup plan and having a second choice for things when not going right or wrong. I mean, not right or wrong, not going your way. It's what I believe, recommend. Although ABB hardware has a very high uptime, and we do have very trustworthy data on that regard. As you were saying, fleet is also critical, but unless we see public, but when coming to fleet, you can plan a little bit more, and it depends more on you when it comes to how to design this network. So I will recommend it for sure, having a backup charger. Of course, we always recommend power not necessarily being the highest, the better. I think you can definitely play with those variables on your side and have dimension for your main charger, and also a backup, let's say a slower or less powerful level 3 charger, just in case. But we definitely not always think that go bigger, go better always, but having a backup plan is definitely a good idea. Yeah.
Dwayne, we have a very specific question about off-road use of electric vehicles. So there's an example here, which I think is fantastic, of an F-150 Lightning being used for Forest Service work. What should fleets be thinking about when they're using vehicles off-road in terms of alignment, in terms of tire rotation, in terms of inspection? What sort of is your recommendation when it's a harsh environment like that, at like a Forest Service road?
Well, Ford Lightning, I mean, their manufacturers, ourselves include, make a tire for that vehicle with its extra weight. And so when you used to put on, and the fleet guys will understand this, we used to put on 10 ply or load range E. Now there's a 12 ply, so load range F that's suitable for those heavier vehicles. The big question will be range. And so you'll have to work your way through the range, I would imagine. Jérémie could probably speak more on that, but I think, I talked to Jérémie. I'd love to do an F-150 and lift it up, for the oil sands out there, just to see how it would react. But with that much more torque, you're gonna have the traction you need. You have the tires available that are right capacities. I think you just really want to make sure that you're just playing with the range, so you can understand what that's going to look like, depending on how much weight you put in that vehicle, right?
Yeah, that's great. Jérémie, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think Dwayne covered it. I'm just going through the questions here. There's so many good questions in the Q&A. I think we're going to have a good amount of chats back and forth for the last section here.
Well, actually, there's a question I really liked, which was about what I find to be one of the kind of killer apps of electric vehicles, which is that you don't just have to use that battery for your powertrain. You can use the battery to power a chainsaw on a work site. You can use that battery, in an Ioniq 5 to run the cabin and accessories. So you can use it as an office, on the road in a weird way. Is there anything, I think the concern here is if you start to use the battery for, let's call it vehicle to load use, is that a risky thing to do? Does it degrade the battery significantly faster, or will this not impact maintenance at all?
I'm happy to tackle that one. So the vehicle to load, vehicle to home, or vehicle to grid, right? Those three different applications where, the load, and that's where for fleets, when we're looking at commercial vehicles powering generators, not generators, air compressors or welders or things like that, at the end of the day, they're not actively using that battery 24/7 all the time in most cases. And if they were, it'd be as if they were driving, 400 kilometers on that day. It's really not that, it's not that much wear and tear on the battery. And vehicle to home, if there's a power outage and you're going to power your home again, we have power outages a handful of times per year, some areas more, some areas less, but it's not that much. Vehicle to grid, on the other hand, does have the potential to cycle your battery more. And the way that battery degradation, there's several comments there on battery degradation. What can we expect over time and different charging patterns to ensure we have the greatest longevity? At the end of the day, a battery reacts to how many cycles. Can I fully charge it and fully discharge it? How many times? Hundreds, thousands of times, right? And if your vehicle has a 500 kilometer range, well, if you can do that 1,000 times, then, that's 500 1,000 kilometers you can achieve on that battery. So if you're charging and discharging your battery through vehicle to grid or through vehicle to load with your welding machine that you're welding for 20 hours in that day or whatnot, sure, it'll put some wear on that battery, but I'd say overall it's quite minimal. Maybe vehicle to grid if the grid's constantly pulling from it, but from a lot of the modeling that we've seen, that's not really the use case for vehicle to grid. It's more for more complicated balancing things for the grid, like grid balancing and spinning reserves. So on that front, I wouldn't be overly worried about it. But I do want to tie into another question that was there asking, well, what is that impact of charging to 100% or 80% or, what are we talking here? And I can't speak to medium and heavy duty buses and trucks and large vehicles just because I haven't had enough hands-on experience and experience with customers. But on the light duty side of things, for normal vehicles, I'd say on average, you're going to see maybe over 100,000 kilometers. You'll see between 6 and 9% battery degradation, maybe potentially less. Over 200,000 kilometers, you'll start to maybe see a little bit more than 10% degradation. In a lot of cases, and particularly with Teslas, they have even lower battery degradation than that, right? They keep their charge levels extremely high. Now, if you fast charge the vehicle every day, the data that we've seen up until now, it will wear your battery, maybe quicker than if you were to just use a level 2 charger. Now we're getting a little bit of conflicting information and data on that. There's some new studies saying actually overall as a big picture, it doesn't impact it that much. My message is it really depends on the usage case and the duty cycle of your company. Find the vehicle that suits your requirements and your needs. And if your battery lasts 8 months less time over 15 years than if you would have had a specific thing, what's more important is to really fulfill the needs of your company and to be able to operate it effectively. And if that means you have to charge every day to 100%, then do that. Now, if you can avoid leaving your car at 100% state of charge for extended periods of time, that's an important one. So a lot of these vehicles, you can say, I leave at 7 a.m. That's when I want it to be charged. So it won't start charging at 5 p.m. when you connect it. It'll just start charging to ensure that it's fully charged by that 7 a.m. So again, charge it to whatever the needs of your business is. And these vehicles are meant to be used, right? It's a work tool.
Jérémie, and if you allow me to maybe, say something regarding what you were pointing out, I guess infrastructure is something that needs to grow a lot in the following years. So also my 5 cents here, my advice will be use as much as you can every type of infrastructure that you get your hands on. So if it is level 2 that is on your condo strata building or at your place or any other or a public station, and then fast charge when you can as well, and try to variate as much as you can also, because I think at the end of the day, we're all learning here. It is a very new thing, like the network and everything. So I would say that the variation is also something that it's necessary, I guess. Yeah.
That's great. We've had quite a few questions about northern communities. So let's sort of hit them off one by one. First, the skilling challenge in some of these communities. And Jérémie, as we've discussed in the past, a lot of these communities also don't have the really robust service centers with sort of skilled workers who are easily available, like you would have in a major urban center. So I don't know what your advice would be for rural and remote use.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that different than if, unless you live close to a college that offers that course, then you're in the same boat as everyone where you have to send your employee down for training. It just happens to be further and it's a bit more challenging. There are some online resources and online courses that are available, but that hands-on is pretty key. So I would identify that as a gap in the market right now where there's opportunities for a lot of providers to come in and support those transitions. The good news for those northern markets is EVs work really well in the cold. When it's minus 50, your EV turns on like turning on a light bulb. You're not having to crank an engine that's struggling to turn over and start up. An EV just turns on, right? It's like turning on a light bulb. So, when it comes to being in a really, really cold environment, they work well, but you want to make sure that they're connected to chargers, that they can keep their batteries warm and they can operate well. But yeah, EVs in very, very cold environments can be a great choice.
And it's kind of a complementary question for charger maintenance in rural and remote. How do we meet that challenge, Florencia?
And I think I will use the same line as Jérémie when it comes to, it doesn't matter if it's like northern territories or the northern parts where it's a bit more remote or a bit more rural. I think ABB has a mandate of, I'll say, train every customer that gets hardware. And I think it's very important to, I guess, assign a responsible within the organization, whether it is an area or a person. It usually happens that people change from place to place. So it's important that you retrain your organization in that regard so you can get skilled maintenance. And yeah, I mean, we as ABB also happen to have and take care of other situations where the customer or the end user doesn't want or doesn't have the capacity to do their own training. And this is where we step in with a service level agreement or with a permanent preventive maintenance, where and I was looking to the questions where we assess, I'll say every charger, well, it's not like different, but I would say the situations could change. The frequency where you need to change definitely spare parts. So our specialists go and do like an inspection, clean everything and find out what's the frequency for that charger. So I'll say that is the correct way to approach this. And to clarify, it was 7% of the cost of the hardware. It wasn't, because I saw a question also regarding to if this was a saving, like am I saving 5%? I'm sorry to disappoint, but it's a cost. It's an estimation for maintenance. That was my intention. So yeah.
Okay, this is a great question. Top 3 components in an EV charger that you need to sort of have spare parts, break most often.
So if we're talking about our all-in-one solution, because it will change when it comes to pantographs that are on the transit side of things more frequently. But when it comes to all-in-one, I would say outlet and inlet filters, they are key because we're talking about an equipment that needs to have working temperatures and it's air cooled. So the amount of importance of this equipment not having a different temperature than what it should be, it's key. So we don't see any accidents happening. So it's very important to have outlet inlet filters. If it is on your possibilities, to have a spare part. If not, of course, ABB offers to keep spare parts. We have here in Montreal, we have our headquarters. Where am I right now? I would say that's the key. And yeah, I won't recommend to have a cable on the spare part of things. Yeah, I think that takes a lot of time. It's not like a filter that you can change. You have to change it every year. Imagine. So I will recommend, probably.
And the filters, are those for DCFC or level 2 as well?
DCFC for level 2, not any recommendation specifically, no.
So level 2 is a lot less complicated, a lot less.
It is, and it usually, well, we do, so you would say remote commissioning, and we do remote maintenance from time to time. We also specialized in, let's say, 1 year. That's what we usually offer. So remote maintenance with the commissioning. Yeah.
Well, with that, we're at the end of the Q&A segment of today's session. Jérémie, Dwayne, Florencia, a huge thank you for sharing all of your insights and knowledge with our audience today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's been fun. It's been really fun. Thank you.
And thank you as well, Ilana, for being our moderator today. Thanks to everyone in the audience for all the excellent questions. I think we had a really excellent extended conversation about maintenance. Also, a big thanks once again to ABB e-mobility and to Sailun Tire Canada for sponsoring this event and for being great partners in the EV Fleets program. Last but not least, I want to share a bit about a massively exciting event coming next May in Toronto, the EV and Charging Expo 2024. The 2024 edition is expanding on the success of the first expo held last year, with more commercial vehicle test drives, the latest in EV charging technology, and sessions and keynotes packed with experts sharing best practices. It's also a great place to build relationships and collaboration networks. You won't want to miss it. And early bird registration is now open. You can also claim a free expo pass by completing the EV Fleets online course before March 11th of next year, then sharing that with your LinkedIn network. To get started, just go to evfleets.pro and register, and all the instructions will be shared with you. Thanks again to everyone for being with us today. Have a wonderful day.